All right, I've been gone a little while. Explain my situation. I'm actually in the garage of my house right now. I'm not living in my house right now, but I was living in my mother's apartment upstairs, and we're trying to sell her house, so I moved out and moved to an apartment. And this little small apartment really has no place to video or work in or anything like that. It's very dark, it's everything like that. And so I have not made any videos, I haven't done anything like that. So I just haven't done anything. So I'm over at my house in my garage, and I hope to be in this house in a month. I hope. We've had a number of things happen, just ridiculous things, but it's just God's will, and we'll see what we can do. I'm happy about my house, but everything is so slow. Today is Monday. We're having severe rainstorms down here right now, and so I'm in the garage. You're going to hear a lot of noise of rain and stuff like that, but we'll try to get by on that. I have a block here that is 1.5 by 1.5 by 4. And one of the things that I carve mostly is hobos. But I've never carved a hobo from, well, I mean, I cut them out and carve them, but I usually don't ever carve them from a block of wood. But we're going to try to carve a hobo from a block of wood today. We've carved several figures. And let me get my knives here. Okay, now what we do is, the first thing I always do is we're going to just simply establish, as we did before, where my feet are. And so they're going to be somewhere around in here. You just come up like a 1/2 inch or something like that. And you draw your little line. I'm just so used to it. But you come up about a 1/2 inch and draw a little line. And that's where your shoe's going to be. And then your head's going to be up here. But the first thing I want to do is go ahead and round off, because he's going to have a hat on. Let's go ahead and round off okay, let me pull this up just a little bit more. I don't know why I'm not catching that the way it should be, but I'm going to go ahead and round off the top of the head like this. That's what we want to do first. Hobos are my specialty. I have carved a lot of them, and I have sent a lot of them out. I mean, they are in a lot of homes and stuff like that. Hobos are not a product of today. They're a product of times gone by. Although, to be honest with you, people that you would call homeless, perhaps, or whatever, they would be considered hobos, but they're really not. The homeless is not a hobo. We wanted to refer to that, but it's really not. A hobo was a totally different person back in the 20s, back in a time where they would ride the rails of the trains. And maybe I've discussed this before, but I'll discuss it again. Hobos were simply men. Actually, they were just, a lot of them were normal men who, during the Depression of 1929, lost everything. They lost everything they had. And just like you know, it's like, for instance, when Harvey came along and destroyed my home and would have taken everything in the home, and there would have been nothing left for me. I wouldn't have had a place to stay or whatever. I'd have had to find a place to stay, and so I would have, you know, gotten on the, you know, hop trains and done things like that, which people just they don't do that today, basically, because trains are so different, you know. But hobos are a product of our world at one time, of our history, and they were interesting people. They really were. All right, now the reason I did that is because I wanted to sort of, we're going to put a hat on him, so I wanted to sort of get that rounded off in there. Now let's come down here and let's go ahead and let's separate the shoes from the person, the body, as we might say. If you Google hobos, you can study a lot about them, about what they did. But most of them were not just homeless people. They were actually men who, they had homes and their families, and they left their families to go and to find work, and then they would send the money back home. A lot of that is based also upon of what is going on today in America with people coming across the border. A lot of people, a lot of the reason that Mexico and a lot of these countries don't mind all these people coming across the border is because they profit from it. Now, there was not a profit that the hobo had. I mean, some were vagrants, some just wanted to live like that, but many in the 1920s, they had to go find work. And with it as it is with those people that cross the border, what happens a lot of times is they get work over here and then they send the money back home to their family. And by doing that, that also creates a revenue in places like Mexico, where the poor people, they don't have to take care of them as much, and they probably make money off them sending the money back. So things don't really change a whole lot of times. Okay, we've got just the look of our our shoes here. We'll just bring them down a little bit. They're too big, of course, but there we go. There you go, see? Okay, we're going to come back here and we're just going to kind of bring this down just a little bit. This is the back. But hobos were a little bit different than the homeless people. Well, in a way, they didn't have a home either. But they didn't have one by choice. And I'm not saying all homeless people, don't do it because of choice. But so I don't want any complaints and I'm calling the homeless people this and that. I am not, please believe me. They're legitimate people who are hurting and need the help that they need. But I remember a time when somebody that didn't have money and stuff like that, they were called vagrants. And they were that meant vagrancy, of course, if you don't understand, which most people do. Vagrancy simply means you didn't have any means of support. You were broke in a lot of ways. So during the Depression, there was a lot of vagrancy. There was a lot of people that were broke. And a lot of these people were not people necessarily that were just poor. These were people that actually had money and lost it all in the stock markets and stuff like that. The stock market crash of 1929. Okay. So this is what we are talking about. The vagrants. Okay. Now we have what we want to do is we want to come to where the head is a part of him right here. And so we can get, let me take my ruler, and let's just, kind of divide it a little bit here. Look at it a little bit, and let's just come down about 1 inch. Let's just say about 1.25 inches, somewhere around there. Let me look at that. Let me look at that as far as the head. That will do. About 1.25 inches. Although we're going to have a hat on him, so we can come down 1 inch and say 5/8. That would be fine, just right there. Okay? And we draw us a little line, 1 inch and 5/8. And then we just sort of come up here on both sides. Just kind of bring it up just a little bit and come across the back. In other words, and this will be our head, and this will be our body. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and cut and take that down a little bit as we go on both sides. I always found the hobo lifestyle fascinating. I mean, it was not, don't get me wrong, it was not a fascinating lifestyle. It was a very horrible time for people, but I just found the characters, as I began to read about them, fascinating. And a lot of people that do hobos, they see, you see a carving of a hobo and he's smiling and he's having a, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's good. That's fine. I just don't see a hobo as that. After reading about them and stuff, they were not happy people. They were broke. They were worried about their families. They were doing, I'm not trying to bring depression on anybody, but that's just exactly during the 1929 crash. I mean, people just lost everything. And I know that feeling. Now, when I lost everything in my home, I still had things, but these people lost everything. They had nothing left. So there was a real issue of people that were, just really in bad shape. So we're going around the head right now, and we're just sort of getting it fixated and getting it ready to be a part, as you see, be a part of the figure and everything like that. So hobos were definitely a different breed of people. They love their families. It's very similar to what happened in Oklahoma in the Dust Bowl, when people had farms and the farms produced, and the Dust Bowl came along and just stripped them of everything they had. And if you've ever seen The Grapes of Wrath, if you have not seen that movie, The Grapes of Wrath, you understand what happened to a lot of those people during the Depression and the Dust Bowls in Oklahoma. where the people were, the farms were devastated by the Dust Bowls, and they had no other choice but to take their family and leave and go elsewhere. And usually these people were taken advantage of, just like the, as we say, the immigrants were taken advantage of that are going on right now, in other words, by the cartel. People that are poor do get taken advantage of a lot in most situations, but it's just really a very sad situation. Okay, now we're going to take the body and we're going to start kind of getting it underneath here and taking stuff away from it, just like this. And so it's a very interesting discussion or to talk and think about what happened years and years ago. As we begin to see, we see the figure beginning to. And I, believe it or not, I never thought that the hobo would be the most popular thing that I carve for people, but it is, because I think it reminds them of a time that that was very susceptible to them. All right, here's our figure so far. Pretty much similar to what we normally do. As you begin to work with just a block of wood. Now, on one side, I'm just going to have his hands in his pocket, just like that, drawing that, having his hands in his pocket. Here we cut that, we cut away, we cut that, we cut away. So I became fascinated with the subject of hobos, and I began to study it. I began to read about them. My dad knew during that time, he knew some men who became hobos, and they had to leave and help their families and stuff like that. As you see, I am making the back as I come back here and make the back of the. So I enjoyed listening. He's told me some stories of men who were hobos and who had been lost everything during the Depression. And my father was not, let's see, my father was born in 1918. So during the Depression, he would have been a boy. 1918, 1920, he'd have been 2 years old. In 1920, he'd been 11 years old at that time. So he didn't. Now, the thing about the Depression, and a lot of people didn't understand that a lot of times, is that where I lived, or where my father lived and my grandfather worked in the oil refineries, it did hit the oil refineries, but it didn't hit them as bad as it hit investors, in other words, like in New York and places like that. So people still worked, but they just didn't make as much, but they still had jobs down here during that time, my dad told me. And he was 11, So it really did not affect him too much. All right, now here's the arm, which we've done. So it didn't affect him too much. It was, in that sense, although, you know, what after Depression, what led to World War II did affect him, of course. And I mean, my grandfather worked in a refinery, but back then they didn't make that much money, so they were still poor people. I mean, they didn't have a lot, so it was just different. It's a different time. And people back then didn't have a lot anyway, so you know, it was not any different. Okay, now what we want to do here on the other side is we want to come over here. If you look at the figure like this, you want to come over here and you want to draw a hand. Just kind of draw a hand like this. And if the hand's a little bit too big, we can bring it down. You draw a little hand right in here. And then you come across here like this, and you come, excuse me, and then you come up like here. In other words, come here, and then you come down like this, and you come down like this. What you're doing is you're making a arm, a hand that goes out like this, okay? And we'll bring it in. So my dad wasn't that old, so Depression was not as, like I said, the area down here was not hit as hard. Well, it was hit hard, but the oil companies still were making some money, you know, and stuff like that. They didn't lose their jobs. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. They did not lose their jobs, so, or my grandfather did not lose his job. So, we're going to cut down here like this. So we did not, my father said that they did not suffer as greatly from the Depression as a lot of people would have. Of course, later on when World War II came in, my grandfather and grandmother did suffer. When my dad went to war and became a prisoner of war. So even though they didn't suffer at that time, they suffered later with a lot of things. So that's a little history on